Thanks for coming. I assume that most of you are here because you want to talk about EXR itself. I wanted to give a little bit of background about the Academy Software Foundation and what that means for the project. We'll go over some of the recent stuff that's been going on and kind of how we got here, the release that we're planning, and some of the upcoming work, and then most of the time will be opened up for a discussion about the future. Start with an introduction. I'm Cary Phillips. I'm R&D supervisor at ILM. I was around at ILM when Florian and Rod and Drew and the others developed OpenEXR from the very beginning. I really had very little to do with it until very recently. I was a part of the Academy Science and Technology Council that led to the development of the foundation. And so through that and my history at ILM, I felt a real conviction to see that the project is sort of shepherded into the foundation, and that it is well established as a success story for the foundation. For anyone who's not familiar, the Software Foundation was founded a year ago with the mission of ensuring the health of the open source software that we depend on in the industry. There's a lot of organizations that have put their support behind the foundation. Where all of this rubber hits the road is the actual projects. And it's interesting that each of these projects, and Open Timeline O should be up here as of this week. Each of these projects is in a very different state of its life cycle, which is a kind of different test case for what the foundation has to offer. When I think about OpenEXR and what does success look like, I think if you're a developer, a group, a company, or whatever in search of an imaging format, and you happen upon EXR, the repo, the website, or whatever, you should see a healthy project. You should not see a derelict, neglected code base. You should see code that's maintained and modern, and a healthy community, people asking questions and getting help. And in particular, the particular phase that OpenEXR is in right now is, there was a period of time when it was a system developed by an internal group, internal to ILM, or Weta and DreamWorks, the other major contributors, who were releasing it to the outside world. That's not the phase that it's in right now. And I think one of the things that the Software Foundation has to offer is to ensure that this is a community effort, not dependent on any one individual or any one organization. The other thing is that I think what the community needs out of OpenEXR is primarily stability. This should not be a project that sees a tremendous amount of churn or change, but reliability and stability and staying true to the original vision. A little bit of history. Started in 2003, first release in 2003. Florian wins SciTech Award in 2007. 2010, 12, 14, major new features from Weta and DreamWorks. And then a kind of period of dormancy, 15, 16, 17, not much happening. And we, 2 years ago, succeeded in eking out a release that addressed some of the security vulnerabilities that had been filed. And then last year, another maintenance release. But that was quite a bit of effort to muster to get that out. And so, along comes the foundation. There's a lot that's happened in the few months since the project was brought into the foundation. A lot of stuff going in. We started out with something like 130 open GitHub issues, 30-some pull requests. I think we've succeeded in getting those down to a very manageable level. And in general, there's been a lot of traffic on the repo, people commenting, which is really good to see, and a lot of different people commenting, which is good. So who's doing this? The steering committee is me, Christina Templar leads from Epic, John Murdoch for the Linux Foundation, Kimball Thurston, Larry Gritz, Nick Percino, Peter Hillman, Rod Bogart. Nick Rasmussen is the resident expert at ILM, not formally a part of the steering committee, but one of the GitHub repo committers and one most knowledgeable about the library. So one of the things that's kind of shaped the effort that's been going on is the Linux Foundation's Core Infrastructure Initiative. It's a set of requirements that that are the core sort of gate to the project being fully adopted by the Software Foundation. And it's a set of guidelines that sort of ensure the proper health and robustness of the project in general. A lot of it has to do with licensing, both cleaning up licenses and copyrights, as well as easing the contribution mechanism. We're right on the cusp of putting in place the automated CLA mechanism so that when you submit a pull request, it'll automatically verify that you have the right legal authorization to do that, the license agreement in place. We've spent a lot of time cleaning up the documentation in the library, not so much the technical documentation, but just the information about how to get help, how to contribute, better release notes, that kind of thing. And then a lot of effort has gone into the bill system. Kimball has completely rewritten our CMake system so it actually works. He's also gotten the library to be warning free, so addresses all compiler warnings, and we also have code analysis in place. Some of the earlier speakers have mentioned Azure Pipeline is the CI system that the Software Foundation has settled on. That's up and running, so you submit a PR and it will automatically kick off a build and reject if it fails. It works for Linux, Windows, and Mac OS, and simultaneously runs on the different VFX platforms. This is all very fresh, so it's still a work in progress. And our the analysis through Sonar Cloud is up and going as well. So we're still in the process of establishing this, but it's a good thing. The code coverage on the test suite in OpenEXR, the initial report is pretty good to start out with. Security is one of the things that we've had to address. OpenEXR has the ignoble distinction of being the one Software Foundation project to have public security vulnerabilities filed against it. They've all been addressed. There are a couple that are waiting in the wings for the next release, but just feeling our way through the proper process of dealing with reporting of security issues is something that the foundation has been very helpful with. The issues involve things like buffer overflow and integer overflow, primarily with images that are either garbage or maliciously designed to, like very large images. We're still in the process of figuring out exactly how to handle these edge cases properly. An interesting thing that came up was the Google Fuzz team suggested that we integrate the library with their fuzzing service that basically bombards it with all kinds of data to test edge cases. We decided that that's a level of security attention that we don't really have the capacity to deal with and is not that important to our industry, so we've declined on that. But although they have actually run the service and reported a bunch of issues that we've dealt with most of. We had hoped to have a release by SIGGRAPH, but decided not to kill ourselves, but give a little bit more time to get it out. But it should be coming soon. This is maintenance only. It should be ABI compatible. Again, the main thing is the CMake system that is up to modern standards. A lot of bug fixes and a lot of code improvements. Making the transition to C++ 11, kind of removing some of the old cruft for supporting C++ 98. Our hope is to migrate the release process to use the automated GitHub release process, the automated tarball generation thing. So we haven't made a release in that mechanism yet, so that's coming. A few more things that are kind of waiting in the wings. As a part of the adoption, the GitHub repo is going to move into the Academy Software Foundation organization. This hasn't happened yet, but that'll happen in the next few weeks, I guess. Word is that it should be completely transparent to everybody, so shouldn't really cause anybody any issues. Our intention is to continue the modernization process and migrating fully to C++ 11. We've been talking in the steering committee about code formatting and code style, and I think we've settled on that we're going to run it through Clang Tidy and get it all nice and neat and be done with it. The downside to that is kind of losing line by line history in the repo, but our sense is that past projects that have dealt with this have been thankful that they've done it after the fact. Another thing, we would like to eventually deprecate the use of island thread and migrate to C++ 11 threading. We don't want to have to maintain two different build systems. The CMake system has not been reliable enough to really count on that as our build system of choice, but it is, of course, the only system that works on Windows. So we think, like to be able to deprecate the AutoTools configuration, but we're only going to do that until if we decide that there's no people out there that are not willing to use the CMake system, or anyway, we don't want to have to continue maintaining two build systems. Another thing, a major source of issues that people in the community have is the runtime code generation that's built in the half and compression table code that's generated on the fly. That stuff failing is a major source of problems, and we think what we want to do is just completely deprecate that, generate the code, and check it into the repo. So this is the point at which I'd like to emphasize how much fun this is. And it is so much fun that you want to be doing this yourself. You really do. You know, in all seriousness, it is fun. And although our organizations, ILM, Weta, Facebook, Epic, fully embrace and support us doing this, for the most part, we're doing this kind of out of time stolen from lunchtime and nights and weekends. And, you know, it is a volunteer hobby, basically, that we do because we enjoy it. I'd say this for two reasons. One is it's not like there's a standing team of people that are waiting to, you know, have work requested of us that we can implement and roll out. This needs to be a community effort. And so if there's things you want out of the library, step up and help. And I mean it in big ways and small ways. If you find a bug, try to fix it and submit a request. The idea is the steering committee is the gatekeepers that ensure that what goes in is valid and proper. But we've been doing more work lately over the last couple of months than we're going to be able to sustain going forward. So anyway, one of the main ways to get involved is comment. The steering committee, kind of as we've been getting our legs under the project and dealing with a bit of the past, but kind of deferred maintenance as well as kind of lack of organization. It's been having a lot of discussions kind of internally. We're going to be opening that to the OpenEXR Dev mail alias, so expect to see a lot more traffic on there, and traffic of the form of, hey, what do we do here? What's the right thing to do here? That it really ought to be a community effort. Talk with us if you want to get involved. Read over the contributing guidelines. You'll need a license agreement, but hopefully with the foundation in place, that should be easier to come by. Submit a pull request, and we're going to expect that anything that goes into the library will have a corresponding validation test as a part of the test suite. Several of the topics that have come up in discussion that we want to open up the floor to. Proposal about HighMath, a lightweight reader, multi-frame file format, and multi-part ordering. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the first one, and then we'll open up for the rest. So if any of you were in the session this morning at 8, the general software foundation overview, the HighMath came up as one issue that that people seem keen on. The idea is that there's a bunch of different vector matrix math utilities out there. Lots of projects have kind of developed their own for one reason. Wouldn't it be better if multiple projects could use the same thing? And HighMath has a lot of fans and supporters, and it's used. The thing that we've been talking about proposing to do is to one, modernize it and update the code in various ways, split it out from OpenEXR so that it's a separate, independent entity. That makes it easier to build and distribute and integrate with other applications. One of the main objections that people have about the library is the use of exceptions, and whether you agree with it or not, there's a lot of people that want a vector matrix math library that does not have support for expression or exceptions. So our idea is to make that configurable. There are literally millions of lines of code that are built on top of this this library, at ILM in particular. And I think one of the things that we feel going into this is that we're not willing to make non-backwards compatible changes to the library. I think there's certain ship has sailed in certain aspects, and we're not willing to make changes in the library that would necessitate breaking or fixing a lot of code on top of it. So that's kind of one of the ground rules. But what we're imagining is, this doesn't exist yet, but a repo at the level of the Academy Software Foundation that's the vector matrix box color, quaternion, frustum, that kind of thing, as well as the half library. Again, giving an option, whether that's if-defs or templates or something that would allow you to have a version of the library without exceptions, possibly header only. We want to move iThread and hopefully IEX out of ILM base and into OpenEXR proper. This general utility ought to come with Python bindings, which are in PyIMath, PyILM base. The kind of universal consensus is Boost Python is a pain to deal with, and people seem to prefer PyBind 11, so migrating to PyBind 11 is something that we generally think would be a good idea. What this would mean is that OpenEXR proper would have an external dependency on IMath, but hopefully a lot of the CI infrastructure stuff that's going on now should make that a lot easier to deal with. Before we go on to the other topics, I'd like to open this up for discussion. Does anybody have any comments on this? Mark.
I'd like to see the off library move completely out I'd like to see the half library move completely out of iMath and standalone, because it's often the only thing that we're bringing in OpenEXR for is access to half. Or if we could even move towards asking the C++ standards committees to include it as a standard type or things like that would make it a bit easier to use.
So you want it separate so you can include just that and nothing else?
Yep. Probably, yes. I mean, potentially. It really depends. Like, having header-only libraries is also not super awesome for your build times and things like that. So if it, just still needing to have it as a thing.
Yeah. Have build-time dependency resolution issues that you have to deal with, right? So if you just want to pull out half.h out of EXR or iMath, you have to your full build-time dependency resolution has to support that properly, and you can get into compatibility issues there. So oftentimes you'll have a plugin that needs half, a little small module, but you don't want to bring in the dependency on the entire library. But you have to declare that you want a certain version of OpenEXR to get the header path.
It really should be a standard type. Like it doesn't need to be a library. It should just be in a standard somewhere hooked up through. I think that's an interesting direction.
And machine learning as well. I believe that's already on the radar, but I don't know what the implementation will end up being.
Right. Google has another proposal with their B floats, I guess for brain floats or something. So that's an adjacent proposal. I guess there's probably a little bit of research that needs to go into, sorry, a little bit of research that needs to go into the ultimate disposition of half.
But it's probably not a bad idea for us somehow collectively to be involved with that, just because as the industry, like, we probably have a longer experience dealing with half than anybody else, right?
Yeah, and especially we've done a lot of work with really weird corner cases like exceptional value propagation and stuff like that, that if you're just coming to it fresh because you're solving for machine learning or whatever, might not have been an issue for you yet. So.
To split it out as a separate library would make life easier for the people that want to use that and nothing else. It makes it a little bit more cumbersome for OpenEXR because it means it's another external dependency. Anybody else?
Oh, yeah. No, I just want to take a temperature in the room of, like, if this split and the kinds of changes we talked about we're making, would that actually cause those of you who I will not name but know who they are to stop making additional incompatible vector libraries separately for every open source project?
Yes, Larry.
Thank you.
So a little earlier this year, I think the FFmpeg maintainer for OpenEXR support dropped out. So has there been any thought about trying to push OpenEXR support in FFmpeg a little bit more and support that effort?
Anybody?
Thanks. Yeah, we were talking about sort of improving the state of the C bindings that are kind of in there, and then that becomes a lot more palatable for those guys to adopt a dependency because they like to build against C. But I know we have an internal version of the EXR reader for FFmpeg. So.
Can you fill us in on what that means? Like what's the implication of FFmpeg in OpenEXR? How is that used? What's it for?
Well, so like we use it to bake dailies, for example, right? We just pipe the EXR straight into, yeah.
Like having FFmpeg being able to read the individual EXR files to turn it into a reader.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that we're talking about FFplay being able to be the primary player. Yeah, yeah. No. Right.
I got it.
That's a good segue to the next topic, unless you wanted to, is this related to this?
Hello? There's an unofficial subset of OpenEXR that's standardized as the ASUS container format, SMPTE ST2065-4. That standard mandates no compression can be used. People ignore that all the time, but that's the mandate because the compression types that are built into OpenEXR are not nominatively referenceable standards. Has there been any thought to standardizing some of the compression methods that are embodied in OpenEXR?
Anybody? So,
They're not like SMPTE standards, though. That's the problem. So Joseph, come to the ASUS. I'm right here, in your row. Come to the ASUS Birds of a Feather at 2:00.
Yeah,
We have a little bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, I would just also add that there's a bird flying around this room.
of a feather.
Yeah. It's a bird. No, I would just say that the advice to people who have questions like that of like, have you considered? And then we all like look at each other like, no, we haven't considered that. Like that is your cue to get involved in the project. If you want a particular future for EXR, be the person who makes that future happen.
That's a good segue to the next thing that's come up. This was raised last year at the Birds of a Feather, was the question of a lightweight C version of the library. This comes up in various situations for one reason or another, applications that don't want to have to deal with the full complexity of the library for embedded systems or there is actually a C API for reading RGB A images in OpenEXR. I'm not sure how widely it's used. I have a sense of where this is coming from. That's not really a solution. There is a library out there called TinyEXR that is maintained by a totally different project. But it just, again, this is not something that the steering committee is planning and putting out there, but if this is something that's of interest to the community, did I get a volunteer over here? In the
Well, we certainly have certain applications, legacy equipment like film scanners and film recorders and stuff that really require the C binder. So, kind of sort of every year that I've been able to attend is requested please keep up at least the IMFC RGB interface. So we've had to occasionally extend it to deal with some of that I'd certainly be able to, willing to look into it and help out. As someone who still compiles everything on an SGI running IRIX. My machine's actually been up and running for, I think, 6 years straight.
Only 6? Another topic that has come up in discussion was the idea of a multi-frame EXR format. And again, I'm bringing this up just because it came up in discussion and not because we have a particular proposal, but does anybody have anything to suggest or comment on? Good idea, bad idea? Right.
There's already a lot of container formats around. I'm not sure that inventing another one should it be more like EXR media in MXF or something like that would be a better alternative? I don't know.
I think the only reason this didn't get total silence was that Peter Hillman at Weta, who's not here, said that he'd actually implemented something like this at Weta some time ago, and next topic to come up. Is there anybody here from Foundry? Oh, okay. Do you want to introduce the issue? Come on. Yeah, or microphone.
So at Foundry, we've implemented behavior for multi-part EXR rendering in Nuke, so that the RGB A part, when it's present, is always the first part. We've also added functionality so that users can completely override the first part to be anything that they want. This has given benefits for, I think RV can now read only the first part, which gives performance improvements. And we would like to see this workflow added to the OpenEXR specifications so that it can be adopted as a recognized workflow.
We needed a lot in post-production after VFX, like for the final DI. We'll get these OpenEXRs that have, 47 mats, all as just separate channels in the first layer. And most of the software will sit there and try to, uncompress or deal with all of those channels when what we want to do, we have to just play the RGB ones in real time and deal with those. If we want to stop and access one of the mats, we can always do that. So when we get OpenEXR from visual effects facilities with all those mat channels, it's during the conforming process, our editors have to go through and split them out into different layers. So we would love it if it became more of a standard that mat channels and ancillary channels were in separate layers rather than just additional channels in the first layer. Thanks.
Is what you're suggesting then just a convention, or is there an actual change to the library?
I don't know if it's a convention or change to the library, but it saved my ass. In that when I have a player going, I can automatically open the first layer of files and give the user something that they're happy about while I sneak in the background and start loading all the other ones. So yeah, it's a good thing.
So yeah, maybe it is just a convention, but the other thing is it seems to, the ability to do this even in Nuke is sort of like, well, how do we do that? What menus do we have to go? So if it was more of the default operation, maybe that would help. And other compositing platforms too.
Yeah, just to reiterate how useful this has been. I mean, this was something that we ran into with a variety of visual effects vendors and software handling this differently. And I think you can handle it as a convention, but I think it would be better off actually putting some controls into OpenEXR so it's something that, like Josh was saying, developers of different software are not trying to figure out how to implement that, but it's actually a requirement in some way to identify the RGB layer, your beauty layer, and something that you don't have to guess whether some software is implementing that correctly or they've followed that version of a convention, but it's just if they're using that version of the library, they have to register that in a way that all of the software is going to handle consistently. So I definitely think this would be a key part moving forward to moving toward multi-part EXRs. And in my experience, that's been the biggest hindrance, moving to multi-part from single part.
So kind of related. I think everybody's talking about reasons here about performance, about real time. I had a question. I wondered if anybody else had come across the problem of actually having to decompress the file before we upload it to the GPU, because we run out of bandwidth very rapidly. And so I wondered about, has anyone talked to NVIDIA? I know I have, about could they support some form of decompression on the GPU? I just say 60 frames a second stereo, 4K plus resolutions. Any form of ride, any form of VR.
I'm wondering if you have any plan to support any other float formats, especially bfloat 16. Currently, my understanding is FP16. From perspective of other vendors than NVIDIA, bfloat 16 seems more performant.
Anyway.
I didn't quite get what the question is.
Larry, you come up. You come up here.
I thought you were going to talk.
Oh, that's easier. My understanding of the current format is that it's using FP16, right? So 10 and 5 bits, respectively.
Oh, I see.
And the question is whether there's any plan to support any other format. So for machine learning, it would be great for us to use bfloat 16, which is a different distribution, is 8 and 7. So is there any plan for that?
You mean just to the extent that the OpenEXR files themselves are providing training data, or is that, it hasn't been on our radar?
No, it hasn't come up.
Frankly, I'm going to twist your question a little bit. Like we have occasionally, had requests, and maybe I'm the person who requested it, I don't know, for, supporting integer formats, which some people still use and are handy for things. So maybe this just falls into that same category of other, other pixel data types. But we've never discussed that, but it's totally valid.
If you're interested in that, I would be more than happy to talk to you about it.
It would complicate some of the efficiency of the EXR compression schemes, which are shockingly knowledgeable about the 10 bits and 5 bits and how they go about doing that compression. So not all of them. So it would probably require a lot more work than just simply supporting it.
New person with microphone. So in terms of the hardware that supports that, it's mostly machine learning directed hardware, mainly FPGAs, TPUs from Google, and Xeons from Intel, and other hardware from Intel. So.
They add an additional instruction
Yes,
recently?
that's a 2019 thing, so I
okay.
assume there will be more discussion happening around the bfloat 16, hopefully, in the future.
Okay.
I just want to make one more comment, which is to support that it would be useful to have machine learning compatible or useful EXR files, because right now we're forced to store our corpuses like in TIFF, which makes me cry every time I see it. It's like, why aren't you using the library that I'm working on? So, anyway.
I'd like to say that we've had occasional need for more than 16-bit float, so we've gone either 32-bit and store them in TIFFs. Some things just don't, we need more dynamic range for some things.
Anything else?
Go for it. So on the note of 32-bit floats, one thing I noticed, there actually was a ticket in about this, and I think it got closed probably because I didn't answer when I took comment. I was asked to comment. Just been busy. But in 32-bit float, some of the compression is currently, as far as I can tell, compressing pairs of bytes instead of compressing 4-byte spans. So as a result, you can very easily just get non-compressing 32-bit files, even if they sort of obviously should compress. And some of the discussion in that ticket was sort of, maybe it's time to add a new compression codec anyway, and that would be an easier way to sort of fix that problem and then just steer people in that direction. But with everything moving into the cloud, it would actually be very advantageous to squeeze some of those files down, and maybe see if there's anything that can get the sizes down a little more in low-hanging fruit ways, and then also potentially some maybe some more advanced ways as well, like more modern compression. One thing I was looking at, just elaborating on that a bit, there's the discussion about multi-frame codecs, presumably to reduce the size a lot. There are some compression codecs that allow you to sort of pre-compute a dictionary of compression tables, and maybe that would be a compromise where we could have some pre-computed compression so that we'd squeeze the files down a bit more without having to deal with sort of random access problems. Just a thought.
I'll mirror Larry with that one. Go ahead and suggest it. Contribute.
This was briefly mentioned in a conversation on the list, but have you guys looked at like Z standard or other zlib compressions, or sorry, not zlib, but other Z compressions?
So the subject of doing different levels of zlib compression has definitely come up recently. I forget the name. I forget the number of the ticket, but I think it's
Yeah,
still
which
open.
one? That's the one. There was a mention of someone saying, "Oh yeah, we're starting to look at other compressions," and I was like, "Z standard." I know that one's been coming up a lot lately.
Right. Sort of on a, I don't necessarily want to derail, but we only have 5 minutes or so left. One of the other things that we have been, at WETA, have been thinking about contributing is sort of a grouped metadata attribute. So basically, you could have a group of metadata that is not, it's just basically brought in and not necessarily parsed through, which should help with the playback performance in the real-time scenario, but also means that we have large, you could compress that and have a smaller file and these sorts of things. So I don't know if there's any other, I see Joseph racing for the microphone.
So at the moment, if you want to change one bit of metadata in the file, supposedly, say that it was shot at EI 800, but it was accidentally left the camera at like EI 400, that's wrong. You want to fix it, you have to copy the entire file. There is no metadata update in place. Should there be?
That's sort of another thing that's been related to this that we've talked about, where you could basically lightweight. If it's size compatible, then be able to just poke it in. I don't know where we'll get to with that, but that has definitely come up.
And you asked one more question?
Thank you.
And there's box lunches back there. If you guys are staying around, Rez is up next.